we're actually going to, tonight one of the topics was talking about a spiritual wellness plan. And so I kind of put a hybrid together, if you will. And you'll see in a minute how that plays out. I'll have a handout for you to look at and how that kind of works together. Let me give you a little bit of a history of who I am before I start. So you're like, what's this guy? What's he talking to us about this topic? And so you're going to have to bear with kind of a rehash of me just a little bit. I'm a Sioux Falls guy. I was born, raised, diapered, spoiled, pampered, spanked, everything else in this great town called Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I just said spanked and abused, right? But it was okay, don't you? I had great parents. They were loving, great parents. Anyway, I grew up here in Sioux Falls, and I'm a Sioux Falls kid. I went to school here, graduated from Lincoln, went to Sioux Falls College, back when it was the coup, Sioux Falls College. I still have a lot of swag and memorabilia from my days here. It's so fun. I have a coffee cup that says Sioux Falls College. It's really getting kind of worn out. You can bury me with that cup. I love that cup. I've had it since I went to school here. So, and when people who went to that college see it, they was like, "Can I buy that cup?" But anyway, having said all that, I went to school here. After I graduated from USF, or Sioux Falls College, I ended up getting involved in ministry, and that was a long shot by any stretch of the imagination. When I first started attending, I'll tell you really quickly because it's spiritual. When I first came here, well, I'll just say it. I found the Lord. I found Jesus in my life here at USF. And I don't know how everybody takes that. I know you have to be careful when you say words today because they have meaning. But that's just the way it was for me. And I got discipled here. And it's where faith came alive for me. And it's where I say the big three things happened in my life. I found Jesus, I found my wife, and I found my calling. So those are three pretty big needs. So if I say that, that means this place is very special to me. I kind of consider it holy ground. Went off, did ministry with the youth pastor, and got my graduate degree work out of Boston. I did church planting, did youth ministry for like 20 years. And I worked as a pastor, and I was a pastor at a church called Central here in town, Central Baptist, now Central Church. Was there for a lot of years. I was a youth pastor for many years, and I moved into an associate, and then moved to the teaching team and things like that. So, been around this town for a long time. I also have a connection here in that 2003 or 2, President Benedetto at the time contacted me, and John Higgle and a few others, and they were desiring to put together a youth ministry major. They knew I kind of had a background in that, and I loved the college, and I knew them. And they asked if I would come and help start a major for youth ministry. So right around that time, in 2003 or 4, most of you were very young at that time, good Lord, I started teaching here. So I was an adjunct professor while I was a pastor. So I did that for about 6 years. And so what's really weird, and then I'm going to get into the whole lecture or talk thing, is that now a lot of the students that were in my class at the time, they're pastoring now, and they're doing the whole thing. And it's weird to go to a church. I was visiting Dave Campbell went to school here, and he does some work, but he's pastor of Invitation Church. And I knew Dave when he was running around and, just a kid, middle school, and then he grows up and goes to college. He's one of my students, and now he's got a church. And I look in the mirror and I go, I am getting really, really old. So that's kind of how that goes. He's got kids and, the whole thing. But, so life is good. Hey, I tell you what, I always open with a word of prayer, and I believe in it deeply. I gotta be honest with you, the older I get in life, and I'm getting there, I got 3 teenagers too. I got 3 high school students. 3 high school students. Can you believe that? 3 high school, I get no sleep, is what's going on. Does anybody remember when they were 17, 16, 15? Oh my word, that's a whole other world. Okay, so I was just telling you over here, I get more tired on the weekends. Weekends you used to rest, right? Not in my life. That's like, man, weekends roll around, they're out till, whatever, friends running around, like school activities, and oh my word. Monday rolls around, I need a vacation. I'm exhausted, so I need prayer every day. It gets better and more important in my life every day. So let me pray, and then we'll dive into this topic. Dear God, we thank you for this university. It's been a foundation and a place for great things for many, many, many years in this town. In fact, it's almost as old as this town. And it's had a spiritual impact far beyond the boundaries of Sioux Falls. It's been a place where students have gone out into literally the world and shaped it, and many in your name. And they have had an impact in many, many ways. And so, Lord, we pray that, that would be the continued mission of USF, that they are uniquely established as a Christian university that also is challenging students to be effective leaders and motivators and thinkers and shapers of culture for the very good and positive things of life. And as we talk about this topic, which isn't sometimes easy when you talk about abuse, may your grace supersede, and may your spirit kind of envelop this environment that we have our thinking caps on, and we can really wrestle with good issues. In your name we pray. Amen. So this is my class over here. We're small. There's 5 of us. Only 4 here. 1-6. So you have 1-6. Like half the group is gone. But so say hi to each other. There you go. It's nice. Good community. But what I want to talk about in abuse is this idea of spiritual abuse. And I have been a pastor. Was a pastor, and I still am a pastor since 1990. I don't even know how long that is. It's just a while. And I'm not even do the math because that would be weird. But I will tell you that in every church that I've been at, there's been probably a bit of a different degree of how this plays itself out. Some more pronounced than others, some more covert, some more less covert. It is one of those things that oftentimes I find that churches and people, and especially individuals who have a spiritual inkling or a faith background or desire for that, and I don't want to raise the hands, I don't want to do that. If I make an assumption, I'm going to assume in a room about 25 of you, 30, that probably I would estimate, if I said a show of hands, and I've done this in other places, but I won't do that tonight, that probably if I did that, I'd say 60 to 80% of you would probably raise your hand and say you have some type of a spiritual and or faith inclination. The degrees in which that takes place, I totally get that. Some of you are much more involved maybe in a church than someone else. Some of you are maybe more attuned to traditions out of your family background than others. Some of you are just exploring it. But from some degree, there's probably, for the most part, many of you would say that you have some kind of a tradition or a faith or an understanding of spirituality. So when we talk about this idea of spiritual abuse, which they asked me to do, I wanted to approach it in a sense of, let me explain a few things how I see it. First of all, if you say abuse, let's just say the word abuse and take out the word spiritual for a moment. In a very simple term, it's something or someone who projects a bad effect for a bad purpose. And that seems a bit generic. But what I have found is that when we start to dive into abuse situations, kind of the waves and emanations of the origins of abuse are really critical when you're diagnosing the problem. How I mean that is, I'm not going to look at it through the lens of a pastor. In every church that I've served at, when I was just a little bit older than you, I was kind of thrown deeply into the waters of abuse when I found out that one of the key leaders in the church, and it came out very quickly after I landed there, had been physically abusing his wife. And so when that kind of broke and the waters over the rocks of that situation, it not only had a huge ramification on his family and the victim, but it had a huge effect on the community that surrounded this family. So the extended family, the church body, the leadership roles that he had in the church, how we began to really raise questions about health and deception, and the kids went through a lot of counseling. They ended up getting divorced. That divorce, of course, brought other issues. And so you see how these kind of tentacles move outward. And so for the first 10 years of my ministry career, I probably was more acutely aware of the ramifications of a physical abuse nature. And I understand you've already covered some of that. And in some ways, that became more apparent. It wasn't until I was about in my ministry for 10 years that I began to run into and acknowledge and understand that there's also this thing called spiritual abuse. What's funny is that I say that I started in 1990, and I could be wrong about this, but for me, and maybe I was just naive, but people weren't really talking about spiritual abuse, at least in a church function, honestly until about 2000 openly. But then you started to see this kind of bubbling up in our culture, in our society, in our churches, in our situations. By the way, this is just my own opinion on the matter, and I'll get into it in a little bit. I think we have to kind of coincide spiritual abuse with this understanding of how we look at church leadership. And I think what we see is that there is always a correlation of spiritual abuse of somebody who has authority or power and is able to manipulate that authority or power to the benefit of their own self or well-being. There's nothing in my mind so devastating as abuse in any form, be it child abuse, spousal abuse. These abuses are absolutely atrocious. But I will tell you, I have now, I would have said this in 2000, but after 20 years later or so, I have actually come to believe that you have to put spiritual abuse in the same category for the devastation that it can cause in people's life and well-being. Now, this is a honors course in nursing, am I correct in saying that? No, help me out. Honors course in honors. What's that again?
It makes it major, so nursing.
Oh, makes it major. Okay. In any field that you're going to go into, if it's psychology or medical or in that area, you're going to run into people who, at some time along the way, who feel as if they have been spiritually abused. It's more common than you would imagine. And I started to really realize this when I went to the churches, and we went to one church where I was very large, and I started asking people how they end up here, and I started going into deeper questions, and I was amazed at the number of people who came out of situations where in their past, their children or growing as teenagers or in another church or whatever, and had felt like they were religious-wise abused or taken advantage of or hurt or shamed or grace wasn't exhibited or whatever words they used to express that. And so through that, I started to dive a little bit deeper into how I could help folks kind of wrestle this. And I'm going to tell you my own personal story is in 1990, one of the first churches that I went to was a smaller church that really grew quickly. And it's interesting because I never really thought about it as abuse until a couple of years ago. When as I got older, I look back on it now. I would classify it as somewhat of a mild form of abuse. But after 5 years there, I actually went into the senior pastor and I said, my wife and I were going to resign from the church. I was going to pursue some other things. And believe it or not, the pastor looked at me. I was a pretty young guy still. And I had never worked at a church before, and I was still kind of, learning, and the church was growing, and good things were happening. I thought the youth ministry was strong, and it was. He looked at me and he said, I can't accept your resignation. And I said, what? And he said, whatever, looked at it. And he basically said, I don't see that you have a real viable option for leaving this church body, to leave here, what you're doing in the ministry, the impact you're having on people's lives, to go and do that until it's more solidified. We can't go back to the church and tell them you're leaving until you have something that's more concrete, because they'll think something wrong is going on here, inappropriate. Now, think how crazy that is. I walk into my boss and say, I'm leaving, my wife and I are going to pursue other options. We weren't clear enough in our designation of where we wanted to go, and he did not accept my resignation. So we stayed at that church on almost another 7 months. And in the 7 months I was there, I think I received, at the time as a staff member, as a young guy, spiritual abuse. I felt that I had done something wrong. I felt like I had betrayed trust, that I had broken leadership rules, that I had hurt the elders, that I had done something inappropriate to our students I led because I wasn't going to stay and help them spiritually. And it was very subtle. It was never like an overt, like you're a bad person, but it was this almost an eerie feeling, if you know what I mean, that I had done something wrong. And it wasn't until years later that I came back and I thought that was totally inappropriate. If I would have known more than I would have, now I would have looked and said, well, I don't care whether you like it or not. Here's my resignation. And come 2 weeks, I'm out the door, right? But when you're in that moment and you're young and you're looking to, here's the key. When you look up to somebody as a leader and they can speak into your life truth, and if it's biblically based or it's centered around that, it's very difficult to say no. Because in many ways, the church or that person, that individual represents to you, like either how you look at scriptural, biblical, faith, spiritual authority. And that has a huge emotional impact on your life. So out of that came some ideas or thoughts I just jotted down. So for example, in this situation, a spiritually abusive group or church might claim that they are God's sole channel of communication, and that they alone can rightly interpret God's word for your life. So you're in that situation, and they say, we're interpreting God's word, it isn't clear, you're a leader, you just can't leave under these conditions, so in that sense, you need to stay. To me, that's now spiritual abuse. Abusive groups or individuals also place great emphasis on performance-related works. So here's what I mean by that. If you're at a church and they say, why didn't you show up on last Wednesday night in choir? Or praise worship time. Or why weren't you at this Bible study? Or why did you skip out a small group? Or why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Or why didn't you volunteer for this endeavor? You should have been there, you're a leader. And it's quite subtle, but leadership can very easily start to make you feel guilty because you're not living up to the expectations of what's required of you to be in a healthy community. And I really have to step back as a leader in a church myself and say, what are the expectations that we have of individuals if I'm leading a small group, a Bible study, a mission trip, whatever it is, And you have to be very clear, but I'd say be very clear. But if you're not, then you start to take advantage of people by their emotional state saying, well, you're not quite good enough if you don't do these things. That's spiritual abuse. Another thing that can happen in spiritual abuse, and I'd even call it cult leaders especially, is that they misuse, and I say cult this very specifically, they take Scripture, they misuse it for their own benefit, and to use it for their authority to keep the people under them in control. You know, how many of you in here have ever heard of a guy by the name of Jim Jones? See, we are getting older. You have heard of him! I'm going to go over to those two. Tell us who Jim Jones was. Do you remember who he was?
He kind of formed his own religion. Had these people believe in him, and eventually they all moved to a isolated island.
Yeah, it was Guyana, I believe. Am I correct? Was it Guyana? Guyana. No, Central America, but author, yeah.
Kind of voiced into these people that like the life was corrupt and had to drink this poison
Kool-Aid.
pretty much. And
Killed him, yeah.
it was like the biggest mass suicide.
So the question here is like, in a logical sense, for all of you in the room, somebody, and you knew, was going to drink poison Kool-Aid and give it to your children. All of a sudden would say, no way, you would never do it. I gotta get back to the picture.
Oh, you're good, you're good.
All right, you're filming. Now, the irony of this, or the strange thing, is that two things that Jim Jones did that people in the long haul, well, how did this happen? An extreme case of spiritual abuse where a man actually started out, I believe, in a Southern Baptist church. I have to be careful here, but it was a Baptist church down south. How does somebody get so far off track denominationally or whatever that they would actually lead to people drinking poison Kool-Aid? And my response to that is, that he didn't start out with the concept of let's drink the poison Kool-Aid. He started out with taking God's word and then taking one or two steps this direction away from it in small ways. It's kind of like, I don't know if this is true, you ever heard of the idea that if you put a frog in boiling water, if it's hot, it'll jump right out. But if you just start to slowly turn up the temperature over an hour or so, the frog will never get out of the water and jump out of it because it doesn't realize the temperature is changing and it'll just boil to death and die, or whatever. Now, I don't know if that's true or not scientifically. I don't know if you want to be patient enough to sit around and watch a frog boil, but what I could say to you is that I believe that the concept, though, is it happens all the time in authority and positions of leadership in church structures or in religious settings. And here's what I mean, is that you take a passage of Scripture, you teach upon it, and maybe the next week or whatever, you tweak it a little bit to give yourself a little bit more authority underneath that banner. And you start to do that over time. And what happens over time is that slow, but albeit creep away from it, you can go down the road 2, 3, 5, 10 years later, and people, you'd be shocked if you look at where you started to where you go in the spiritual nature, how far away you are from God's truth. It's kind of like, I tell a story quite often when I did youth ministry to students about decisions they make in life. You know, you never hardly find a student who will wake up one day, and this is a little different topic, and say they become drug addicted. Or all of a sudden, you know, here's a student who's never tried alcohol, and then one weekend later, they're a raging alcoholic, right? It's not going to happen. But here's the thing. It's decisions you make. So when I had a house, my wife and I bought an old house when we first got married, and I had to replace a tile in our bathroom. And I should have never done this, but I thought I was a fixer-upper kind of guy. I'm not. That's not my strength. And I went out to Menards, and we found, this is how old they're, but black and white tile that you could peel off the back. It's kind of cheap, and you just go, slap it on the ground. And it was like, this is beautiful. There's no grout required. I have to lay the paste down. I just got to peel and stick. Great! On our wooden floor. So I go back home. My wife was a little nervous, but I got all these tiles. They're black and white. They're fairly cheap, 79 cents for whatever tile. And I went in the bathroom, and I really didn't know how to begin. I've never done this before, so I kind of looked around the room, and I went, okay, here's a corner. So I just peeled off the thing, and I put it in the corner, and jammed it in the corner, and stuck it. Looks good. So then I took another tile, stripped off the back of it, put it next to it, and I made my way all the way down to this end of the bathroom, and it looked really good. So then I did the second row, and it looked all right. I got to the third row, and I wasn't sure, but I stepped back and I looked, and I kind of sensed there was a little bit of a curvature starting to happen. But I wasn't quite sure. So then I thought, well, I'll just do another row to make sure. So I did another row to make sure. Oh yeah, now the tiles are definitely curving a little bit. And so by the time I got to this side of the bathroom, I was in big trouble because the tiles had totally going at not a straight angle. They were kind of curving like this. And I was just, oh my word. Wife, of course, calls out. She says, how are things going up there? I'm like, oh, things are great, not great. These tiles were so sticky, I tried to pry them up, but I guarantee you, if a nuclear war happened, they're not going anywhere. They're just stuck on the ground. So what I did is I went back to Menards, I bought a really big rug, and I covered the whole thing up. But what I learned is that, here's two things I learned from that. One, it's so easy when you first lay down the road, you think you're on the right path, you're going straight spiritually, but all it takes is a little bit of tweaking from somebody in a position of authority or leadership to give you directions about spirituality, and you buy into that. It's amazing how, if it's not based on God's word, but their word or whatever, and they start to move in a direction, how easy it is to go that direction slowly over time. And you don't even recognize that you're going that path until you're halfway in. And then even when you do recognize it, you may be too far in to say, I don't know how to get out of this, so I'll just go a little bit further because things maybe could change. Right? And what I learned was that to solve that in a spiritual abuse or any kind of a situation like that, is that you have to have a plumb line. So what I should have done, I found out afterward, they didn't have YouTube back then, if they would have YouTube, I would have been good, is that you actually don't base the straightness or the whatever on the wall because the wall is crooked, right? What you do is you have to get a plumb line, find the center of the room, and go with a straight line out of the middle of the room with a plumb line. So what I learned about spiritual abuse and the spiritual nature of that is that what's your plumb line? And that's a good question to write down. I think if you want to avoid spiritual abuse, then the question has to be, I have to figure out a plumb line for my life, the choices that I make, so that I can step back and make good decisions whether or not I see this as a spiritual abuse situation. And I'll come back to that in a second. On the plumb line. In fact, I'm going to have you walk, I'll show you what I have for that. It's interesting, and I'll share some scripture with you. Peter warned, if you know who Peter was, he was a disciple. Actually hung out with Jesus, which I think is pretty doggone cool. Peter had words to talk about spiritual abuse. So what I find interesting about that is that the very earliest sense of the church, Peter was aware of false doctrine. Peter was aware of individuals who would come into a church setting and for their own gain spiritually abuse the congregants or the people underneath them in the flock for their own gain. And so he said in 2 Peter 2:1, he basically says, there will be false teachers among you. And he described these false teachers. He pointed out their propensity to abuse their followers. He said in their greed, which means that there was a sense of greed in their life, either it be through power or money. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you, and they'll do it through fabricated stories. That's verse 3 of 2 Peter 2:1, 2, and 3. In the King James Version, which I don't read a lot, but I love what they put on this. They said, they shall, with vain words, make, and I love this, make merchandise of you. So at the core of spiritual abuse, at least in the sense of how Peter saw it, is that the only gain they get out of it is they see you as merchandise to be used for their own gain. That's pretty harsh words, but pretty critical words. And what probably caught me the most about this is that it was happening in the very earliest days of the beginning of the church. You know, you go down the road 2,000 years later, you can say, well, you can see a lot of things, crooked line methodology. But even Peter, in the earliest days of beginning this ministry and understanding spiritual and church and connections and relationships, he was seeing it. Such an amazing way to think about that. So it's been with us for a long time. In fact, I'll have to look it up here. It goes back in the Old Testament. The Bible's full of this. In Jeremiah, God warns about people who spiritually abuse the flock. In Jeremiah 5:30-31, that's another great verse you could look up. Can't do the whole chapter 5, it's a big one. But in that, it says these words, it says, an astonishing and horrible thing has been committed in the land. The prophets, and this is interesting, prophets in those times would have been considered pastoral, as we would call it today, or the spiritual leaders of their day. This is, God talking. The prophets prophesy falsely. And the priests rule by their own power. And my people love to have it so. But what will you do in the end? In other words, what's happening is that God's saying, look, there's all these false prophets, these false pastors. They're using you like merchandise to gain for their life. The people that should be following me seem to run after them and want to be in their flock and follow their words, and they shouldn't do that. And he just basically confronts us. So what are you going to do about that in the end? So it's nothing new. I mean, we're talking thousands of years ago. They were dealing with spiritual abuse. Goes further. Jump in the next chapter, Jeremiah 6:13 and 14. It says, this is from the least of them, even to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for their gain. And from the prophet, even to the priest, everyone, that's interesting, deals falsely. And they have healed the brokenness of my people superficially, saying peace and peace, but there shall be no peace. So what's God saying? They're getting up in the pulpit, they're saying all the right words, but their motivations of their heart are to use people for their own gain. So to me, abuse and spiritual abuse didn't happen and didn't invent itself just in the year 2000 when I began this saying. That's when I noticed it. It actually goes back to the prophet Jeremiah. He's a really old guy. It's been around a while. It's nothing new under the sun. What I find fascinating is God is very much aware of it. And then to jump ahead just a little bit, and then I want to hand out a handout. Jesus, if you look at and study his ministry, I love Jesus for this reason. People say, did Jesus ever get angry? And I do believe in righteous anger. I do. And I would say there were a couple times that, here's the thing. I'm just going to cut through it because we're old enough and, you can handle it. I'm so sick and tired of how they portray Jesus as kind of this European, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, holding up lambs, always dressed in clean outfits, never had a bit of dirt on his sandals are glowing. There's always kind of a globe on his head, and he's smiling, and he's always got baby lambs and stuff. This is hogwash. Okay, this is nothing more than marketing ridiculousness. He was a Jew, meaning he probably had dark curly hair, to be quite honest with you. Probably had a dark beard, kind of scruffy looking. He came from Nazareth. Nazareth was the junk hole of Israel. It was like going to the worst neighborhood of Detroit in Israel. I mean that. He grew up, they said, in fact, and other people in the writings of the time said, nothing good ever comes from Nazareth. Isn't that interesting? But God chose that to be the birthplace and raised a child that would be saved in Nazareth. So pick of the worst city you can think of, that's where he was born. And he was raised in a poor household. Jesus was poor. Did you know that? Jesus was poor. Jesus was never rich. He grew up in a poor household, in a poor Jewish home. His mother and the whole community, they thought that she had had illegitimate sex before marriage because she got pregnant with this older guy, and then he married her out of the nicest of his heart, but he didn't have to. He could have said, I didn't want to, and she probably would have been stoned. In that culture, that would have been normal. But Joseph was an honorable and decent man who did the right thing. Maybe she became the virgin birth. Again, we cleaned that up so much. She was a young girl who got pregnant before she was married, and Joseph took her in and cared for her in a poor town, in a poor village, in a backwater place. So get this idea out of your head of Jesus. He worked in that carpenter shop, which means that his hands were worn and dirty and full of blisters and splinters and all the hard stuff of life. I want to break that down for you a little bit and just get this image of Jesus and who he is, because I think we clean it up too much in America. And so here's what I find interesting about Jesus, about anger. He had all that emotion in him, and you will see times that Jesus gets really angry. It's fascinating to me that he gets really angry at this group called the Pharisees, who were preachers of their day. They were the pastors who sat in high places, and they gave very glorious speeches with their fancy robes and told people, here's how you need to behave. Jesus called them vipers. In the Bible, he does. I call you vipers, snakes. I call you whitewashed tombs. What is he calling them? Sepulchres. Those are gravestones. In other words, you look pretty on the outside in the gravestones, but in the inside you're hollow and dead, and you're shallow, and you're weak. And he said all these things to them in front of all the other people that, like Jeremiah says, the people had to listen and follow them, but Jesus called them out because, here's why, they were spiritually abusing people. Jesus seemed to reserve his greatest anger to people who took advantage of others spiritually. He went to town on them. When he went into the temple, and he saw the Pharisees opening the doors and letting the greedy traders come in and sell their wares for profit and gain. This is what bothered him. The trading was wrong, but every trader that was in the temple selling their wares had to give a percentage of that money to the preachers and the Pharisees, the temple guard. The people who were supposed to be caring for the people were abusing the people. What did he do? He trashed the temple. He said, this is a place to be a house of prayer. Look what you've done in my Father's house. So we look at Jesus, and he seems to reserve his anger directed squarely at folks who were spiritually abusing people. And it bugged him a lot. He even reserved his judgment against the Romans, less anger or frustration with the Romans. The other thing he said about them at times was, what do you think about Caesar, who ran all that? He said, well, the money situation, taxes, which they had a heavy tax on them. Let me see a coin. What's his face on it? That's Caesar. We'll give unto Caesar what is Caesar, but give to God what is God. He's just saying, look, I don't really like what they're doing, but that's what the Romans do. But I'll tell you about the Pharisees over here, and they're awful. So think about that. To them, they're like, the Romans are the worst. And he's like, no, those guys are the worst. That's my take on it. Now, the reason I say all that about spiritual abuse is that I love it when Jesus had this passage of scripture where he says, take your yoke upon take my yoke upon you. In other words, we're going to get into that. I kind of talked about that last week in my class, but this idea that there's a way to beat spiritual abuse. So, I want to segue. Are we with me? Okay, are we all good to go on this? Are we all right? Okay, are we doing the videotape thing okay?
Sure.
All right, okay. I move around a little bit. It's pastor me, sorry. I don't always like to do that. Now, I want to hand something out to you. So, I want to give a general overview of how I see spiritual abuse happening. It's not a new phenomenon. It takes many manifestations, but it's generally in the area of authority in a religious setting or a church. You have to be aware of that. And then I'm going to wrap up with a healthy churches. But I think the best way to deal with spiritual abuse is to have a strong defense, is to have a strong offense. So I want to show you something. I'll pass these out in this back. I think we got it up. And this is going to be a bit of a spiritual wellness plan. I tweaked it a little bit, but I want you guys to look at it from this idea of a spiritual wellness plan, because that's what it is. That's it. Okay. All right. Where are we at for time? Clock. Yeah, of course not.
6:35.
Oh, got another 25 minutes or so. I'll be done. And we'll do some questions. Does anybody have any questions? What's that? Do you have any questions? How many? Raise your hands. This is fine. I want to get an action. How many of you grew up in a church? That's not wrong. This isn't abuse. But how many grew up with this, I kind of call it the Sunday school Jesus, where he's blonde hair, blue eyes, baby holds lambs, never gets angry, peaceful, and let's be honest, he's probably more Norwegian than Jewish. Raise your hand if that's you. Me too. All right, let's just scan the movie and yoo-hoo. All right, so, and then, what I find interesting even in Sunday school, this isn't spiritual abuse, but you got to be careful with it. And it plays out in how we even teach kids. Noah's Ark. How many of you remember Noah's Ark when you were a kid in Sunday school? Does everyone remember that story? 2 by 2 and the animals, that song you'd sing, here come the animals, little pink giraffes or whatever, and they walk in, and the rain came down, and you'd sing these songs, the boat's on the water, and then they'd see the rainbow, and Do you understand? This is a horrific story we're singing about. Humanity was wiped out. It was Armageddon. It makes The Walking Dead look mild, okay? The rain, think about this. This is a horrific situation. God's judgment is coming, and now think about it, right? Let me tell you another one that we do this. We have to be careful. This is another form. We have to be careful. It can slip. It'll prove to you how easy it is to get manipulated on how we read things. How many of you remember reading the story of David and Goliath when you were a kid? And you go, this little boy comes out. Oh, fight up! This big giant comes out. We had these cartoons. Some kind of cartoons, but they come out, and you'd be standing over, you just hit him, and they'd draw like, then they'd all run away, and he becomes king. And have you ever read the story of David? Really stopped and really analyzed the story. They had this battle. He kills the giant. He kills Goliath, the Philistine. He goes up. He cuts the head off the body, sticks it in a bag, brings it back to Jerusalem. Oh, by the way, when he was going into Jerusalem also a little bit later when he became anointed king, do you understand he danced naked in the streets? Do you know that's in the Bible too? And it drove him crazy. Now, I don't know about you, but if I saw somebody dancing down the street naked at Phillips Avenue, not something I'd probably cover my kids' eyes, it's like, call the police. He danced naked in the streets, but he also had Goliath's head, pulled it out of the bag. Okay, think about how we teach these stories. Think about what we do choose to tell kids and how, and I'm not saying it's abuse, but you can see how easy it is to take something and to tweak it so that it becomes very favorable to us and how we lead. Now, I'm not beating up on anybody who tells stories to kids. If you're a Sunday school teacher, don't walk away going, I feel like I'm... No, you're not. But I do believe we need to step back once in a while and ask some tougher questions of our spiritual leaders and how we communicate. Because these stories do have meaning, and there's a reason for them. And it isn't to say that it isn't good that kids learn them, but we also have to be discerning enough, even as adults, to look at what is there and to discern how to walk through that channel. So, the best, I think, offense in a spiritual situation for you and anybody is to have a strong defense. And so I would say that there are 7 areas that I have found that are ripe for spiritual abuse when leaders come in. That when there's kind of like a pattern that if you're aware of these things and how they play off that, it's a good guard so that you don't get kind of sucked into it, or other people around you don't get sucked into it, or family members don't get sucked into it. And you can just ask them some questions and kind of ascertain, how are things going in this journey of your spiritual, your wellness? And I'm going to do it kind of a this against that kind of thing, okay? And I want you guys to think about your own journey up to this point and how you look at faith and through these questions. And maybe just do a little bit of a jotting some notes on the side, or think about how you're raised. And again, my object in this is not to beat up anybody, but it is important that we ask questions as leaders in the faith, based upon what I think, biblically speaking, how Jesus worked with people. And so, let me just start off with this. These values, I think, give us a good understanding of how to defend or be aware of spiritual abuse. Jesus was trying to build into us protection, if you will, so that we could navigate this life in a healthy way. And one of the ways he wanted to do that is for us to acknowledge the fact, here's some things to think about that you should do in your life so you don't go down this path and open yourself up to not good things like the Pharisees did. First one is this: solitude versus noise. I have come away from this thing, and it's very important that I am convinced, and even as the years go by, especially for you and I who are old enough to remember the days without cell phones.
Yes.
Do you remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
And without YouTube, and without having, this thing in my pocket, I was in probably this room when I was your age. This was never invented yet. This thing was on a wall with a dial on it. I mean, really. I didn't have instant access to information. I think one of the most dangerous things to step into that lets people get sucked into abusive situations, or at least spiritual abusive situations, is the high level of noise that we are living in our society today. What I find fascinating, if you study scriptures and read through the New Testament, especially the Gospels, I am always blown away by how many times Jesus went off to a lonely place.